Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We're back and we're taking a look here at my multicolored copy of Editha by William Dean Howells. And this is realism. This is realism. What makes it real? Well, the subject, a couple looking at their relationship. That's one of the characteristics of realism, is looking into the balance. And this is okay. 3, 2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We're here with the work of realism titled Editha by William Dean Howells. You've seen I've gone a little bit crazy with my highlighters with this story, so please forgive me. When we talk about realism, one of the characteristics of realism is that it's based upon actual events, actual places. And the background event of this story, today we call it the Spanish-American War. If from American history, the saying, remember the Maine, right? The war in Cuba. America also, after the war, defeated Spain, took possession of the Philippines. So that's what the background here is. It's not made up, real thing. We meet Editha, and very quickly we see something interesting happen with Editha and the announcement that war has been declared. And she says, how glorious. And this is really kind of interesting, right? To connect war with glory for Editha, of course, who is a woman. And see my little annotations here is that Editha sees war as noble. She sees the romanticized ideals, not consequences. And by romanticized ideals of war, we don't mean, the Hallmark hearts or anything like that, that type of romantic, that looking at war and purposefully ignoring the fact that there's hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, trying to kill each other with armaments and, just terrible weaponry, all of that. Also ignoring the deaths and the injuries that go on. So that's what we mean when we talk about a romanticized, where you look at the ideal and you ignore the consequences. So here we have Editha, who sees war one way, and then her boyfriend, George, sees it the opposite way. He seemed to despise it even more than he abhorred it. Right? And this is interesting thing about George is that George was going to be a minister, but then changed his mind and decided to become a lawyer, right? So that makes sense that a minister, right, would naturally be a pacifist. And you'll notice that I've used pink for Editha here. And Editha has a really interesting self-perception. She views herself as something that must be won. In other words, that person that she is going to marry must undertake a quest, must do something fantastic in order to win her. That's very interesting. Right? So we can see this here. If he could do something worthy to have won her, be a hero, her hero, it would be even better than if he had done it before asking her. It would be grander, right? She sees this in order for us to be married, right? In order for us to be together, you have to do something to get them. And that in itself is kind of a really strange, way to think and look at love, is this idea that, it's not a gift, that it's something that's earned. Really interesting, right? So what do we see here? We still see that George at the beginning, right, is a pacifist. He's the opposite of Editha. Is it glorious to break the peace of the world? Now here in orange, right, she was conscious of parroting the current phrases of the newspaper. So what do we see here? Again, this is Editha. Is that Editha is influenced by society. That when you use the phrase parroting the current phrases of the newspapers, that's just like you might have a friend or a family member who all that they talk about, they seem to repeat the words that they watch on the news. So many people today just sound like the rebroadcast of the news. That's all that they do. They're just like a parrot, that where they hear something and then they repeat it. Now, what does that tell us about those people as well as Editha? What's going on up here? Yeah, not much. Yeah. So we're developing the characterization of Editha. Okay. So again, green is for George here. Right? What does he say? Do you wish me to feel as you do? Well, I mean, if you feel the way that you do, then that's the way that you feel. Do you really need to ask somebody, do you want me to feel like you feel? Well, what does that say about George? Well, he's weak-willed. He's timid. Yeah. And again, we see another reference to George being a pacifist. Every war, so stupid, it makes me sick. Right? So George is a pacifist. Very, very different from Editha. Kind of makes one wonder, why are they together? Since they got so much, apart from each other. So they have this open disagreement about the war. George goes away without kissing Editha, and she felt it a suspension of their engagement. Interesting, right? That they have this one disagreement, and she feels it as well. Guess we're not getting married now. George doesn't stay for dinner. Makes everybody kind of wonder what's going on. And Editha's mother says, I hope he won't go. That's right. Editha's mother knows the reality of war, while Editha says, I hope he will. The ideal of war. Then she sits down and writes this little letter to George. And this is something here. I said, what should we make of this? I shall always love you, and therefore I shall never marry anyone else, that the man I marry must love his country first of all. Well, Editha says is that I have to marry a patriot, someone who loves America more than he loves me. So puts her thoughts down on paper. And then an interesting thing happens to George. He goes off to a gathering and he gets caught up into the war fever. And then he comes back to Editha and lets her know that he has been selected captain, that he's suddenly just flipped the script here on everybody. And he's volunteered and he's been selected by the other volunteers to be captain. And now look at what he says. I'm going to the war, the big war, the glorious war, the holy war. That coming out of the mouth of what we've previously seen as a pacifist, and now calling war holy, this coming out of the mouth of someone who was going to be a minister, right? So what changed George? Well, we've already seen that George is weak-willed and timid, and everybody around him, right, influences his decision making. And now look at what he says. I never thought I should like to kill a man, but now I shouldn't care. The smokeless powder lets you see the man drop that you kill. Oh, this is brutal. Of course, back in the Civil War, the powder had a whole bunch of smoke, so you would fire your gun and there'd be this big cloud of smoke, and you didn't know what happened. But by this time, right, the bullets are contained in cartridges like we have now. And so there's very little or no smoke at all. So as George points out, you can see the man that you kill. Oh, what's up with George? This is just crazy, 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 crazy. So we have some hugging and kissing and slobbering and all of this. And then Editha starts to think about what would happen if George was injured in war. She thrilled with the sense of the arm around her. What if that should be lost? So now she starts to think about, oh, it would be wonderful, right? It would be a display piece for her to go around with a husband who had lost his arm in battle, and he did that for her. So George goes off to battle, goes off to war, and of course we know what's going to happen, but we have to pick that up in the next lecture.